And we're live. Well, Joseph, good to have you. Good to be chatting with you. We've chatted a few times, I think. I think I've been on your show, and now here you are on my show. Um, I I really would just wanted to kind of start out with giving you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what sell-through social is, and maybe your background as it relates to agencies, since that's who our audience is.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, from a high level, the sell through social system is a is an approach, and I mean, ultimately, it kind of starts at a mindset of how you approach business development, and then gets tactical with the specific activities I would recommend, starting with a LinkedIn live show like the one we're doing right now, and the, the mindset is really a lot of people in the B2B space focus on generating leads. And I mean, ultimately, I don't have a problem with the tactics of certain lead generation things, but it's really more the idea of, hey, if we can just generate more leads, then we're going to be able to grow our business exponentially. So we just need to scale up, cold calling or cold email or whatever it is. But when I've had the opportunity to dig into client accounts from, small clients all the way up to $100 million organizations, and I've seen the data, the majority of consulting companies and agencies grow through relationships and referrals. But then when they want to scale, they kind of throw everything that they've done to the side, events and these relationship building activities, and they go, okay, those don't scale. So now we're going to start doing these very transactional things. So, ultimately, I want to see B2B companies, and especially agencies and consultants, recognize that it is relationships that drive deals in the B2B space. And they make deals move faster. You get opportunities you wouldn't have gotten any other way. Usually your customers stay longer when it's based on a relationship and not a transaction. So that's kind of the mindset that I'm helping people to adopt, and then teaching them a process to actually do that, to start conversations in a way that can scale a lot faster than some of the traditional ways that people approach building relationships.
Nice. Would you say that this is something that you kind of learn through osmosis, through trial and error? Are there, particular mentors that kind of helped steer you in this direction? Like, what's the cool behind the scenes origin story behind this sort of approach?
Yeah, so I'll say it in two ways. The one way is slow and steady wins the race, right? This is like this has been the tortoise story and I would say that this process is something that I've discovered, not something that I had, sitting in the back of my brain and suddenly it just, came to life one day. It's been little little changes over the last few years, and then seeing, okay, what really worked, what didn't. What did I see actually drive results for the companies I was working for, clients, and what were the things that everybody just assumes will drive results at the end of the day, but that I hadn't really seen do that personally, or I couldn't track that. And so, the system's really been born out of trying a bunch of different things, both for myself and clients, and then really honing in on what works and what doesn't. So the origin story is I was doing marketing for small businesses in my own business, creating social content. Then I got a job for a B2B company selling engineering, or I was a product marketer for an engineering software company. So we were selling enterprise sales to engineering teams and industrial marketing teams. And through that process, I was doing all the typical marketing things. I was writing content for SEO. I was creating social content. I was planning and running events. I was kind of in a catch-all marketing position. I was working directly with a sales guy and helping to create sales enablement content. So in that role, I kind of did all the things that B2B marketers do. But then I started taking all of these trainings on SEO and PR and video and a bunch of these things. And at the very end of multiple different courses I took, they kind of said the same thing. They were like, okay, so PR really ultimately comes down to relationships. You build relationships with reporters, they trust you, you send them the stories that help them do their job better. And then when you have a story that's not going to really help them, but you've helped them enough, they're going to publish that story anyway. And that's really the secret to PR. It's like, oh, okay. So PR, you told me all these tactics, but ultimately it comes down to, if you know the right reporters and they like you, they're going to run your stories. Okay. And then SEO, there's all the tactics for SEO, but then this was a HubSpot course. And the lady who was running a lot of HubSpot's SEO said, yeah, so SEO, there's all these tactical things, but at the end of the day, it comes down to knowing other people who are, the SEO folks for other big websites and getting them to post links to your site. And that's like kind of at the end of the day, pretty much how you ultimately rank is by getting those big sites to link to you. And so for them, it came down to relationships. So I'm like, okay, I keep hearing this over and over again, that like it's the relationships that ultimately open the doors to make these things ultra successful. So then I ended up starting to interview subject matter experts on video as the basis for the SEO content that I was creating. So I was able to then build relationships with key people that we wanted to know for our company, that we wanted to build a relationship with. And I used that to create content more effectively. And then right about the same time, I ended up meeting James Carberry from Sweetfish Media, and he wrote a book called Content-Based Networking. And so he kind of took this idea that I was starting to deploy and really put meat behind it. And the idea of content-based networking is you interview the people you want to know on a podcast. And, it's a great way to meet people who can totally change your life. So then James is like, hey, start a podcast. So I started this podcast called The Strategic Marketer, interviewed a bunch of marketing experts, and ended up interviewing my future boss. And when he kind of saw what I was doing, he's like, hey, I want you to come do this for our clients. So I moved from in-house to an agency where we were working with $20 million to $100 million organizations, a year organizations. And anyway, helped launch a bunch of shows for them, taught them social selling to a bunch of client accounts, and ultimately kind of ended up developing this process of running LinkedIn Lives.
Wow, that's a lot. Do you feel like when you tell people, okay, it's this content-based networking approach, that people have kind of like preconceived notions that they're bringing to it that maybe will kind of help, or that will lead them to kind of doing it poorly? And if so, like what are the sort of things that people need to dodge, and what are the things that they need to like move more in the direction of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I mean that kind of pulls into the very last element of why LinkedIn Live. So the iteration for what I'm doing right now with Sell Through Social is I've really cut out all the fat, all the things that starting a podcast or taking that kind of traditional approach of podcasting really gets in the way. So then I started testing this out and went from LinkedIn training around like personal brand and creating content to, hey, just interview people on a show and make it a LinkedIn Live because that's where your audience is hanging out. And then that kind of developed into what I'm doing right now. And the reason is when people think about content-based networking and they want to start a podcast, they get caught up in a lot of things that are not bad, but they're going to really slow you down. So the common things that I hear are, what am I going to call my show? I need a name. What's my show going to be about? I need a premise. And who am I going to have on my show? I need guests if you're going to do a guest show. And then the final one is like, this is going to take so much time and so much effort. It's going to be this huge burden to run this show over and over again. And if you're starting a podcast, all of those things are true. If you're going to launch a podcast, you do need a name. You need show graphics. You need a premise. You need a regular cadence. So you need all of those things. And it's a huge barrier to entry. In fact, the clients that I've worked with, at a minimum, it takes them 3 months to launch a podcast. Normally, it's more like 6 to 9 months before you even release an episode. And in all of that time, it's like all of this workup. By the time you actually go to launch shows, now you're another 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from actually seeing the results. So from the time you actually started working on the podcast, not the time you started thinking about it, usually that's another like 6 to 9 months. But from the time you actually started work on your show to the time that you're seeing results, you're talking about 18 months, 24 months, and that's still far out from results. So people get discouraged. And that's why most people stop. I think it's at 3 episodes, and over 90% of podcasts don't make it past 20 because they put so much effort and they don't end up seeing the results. So the value of launching a LinkedIn Live show like what we're doing right now versus a podcast is you can pick a guest, somebody that you already have somewhat of a relationship with. It could be a current customer that you want to build a deeper relationship with, or a referral partner, or a colleague that you worked with before that you want to build relationship with, invite them on a show next week, put it on the calendar. Now you have a show. You didn't need a name to launch it. You get on Canva and create a background for it. And you could legitimately today launch a show that you actually do the first episode next week. And you'll actually have had a guest on. And then in that 9-month period that most people are taking, you could have interviewed 20 or 30 people. And at that point, really learned, let the market tell you what your show premise should be, what the title should be, and what the cadence should be.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about kind of having the right mindset or motives when it comes to reaching out to these folks? Because I could see people, say it's like a salesperson, they kind of have like that a little more of maybe more of like a pushy, aggressive approach. Um, is that going to serve you well, or is that going to backfire you on you in this sort of thing? And if so, like, I guess what's the right sort of um, mindset to approach a LinkedIn Live with?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, this is a business development tool more than is a marketing tool. In other words, when I'm helping people start shows, when I'm starting a show, it's ultimately about business development, like generating business opportunities that are going to turn into revenue. You still get branding opportunity. You still get, you can still grow an audience over time. But the focus is, how do I start conversations with the right people that I want to sell to, people that, or that's not even the right way to say it, mindset wise, people that need what I have, who I can serve by, them buying what I'm doing, or referral partners or people like that. So I'm saying that as a caveat to say this is a business development tool. And if you don't approach it like that, it's not really going to give you the value that you need. But on the flip side, if you're doing this to pitch people, it's not going to work at all. So, I mean, I've taken cold lists and Sales Navigator in completely new industries with people who don't have any following on LinkedIn at all, and get 5 to 20% of people who have zero connection to this person to say yes to coming on a show. That means you pick 300 of the people you want to know, and you're going to get, a good 4, 5, 6 people at least, usually more. Could even be as much as like 15, 20, 30 of those people that are like key people for you to know in your industry to come on a show. And then you can have a conversation with them. The reason that works, and that it works way more effectively than typical cold outreach, is you're making it about them. And that's kind of the first mindset is, this is about the person on the other end. You're going to reach out to them, and you're not saying, hey, come on my show to talk about what I have expertise in. You're saying, David, you have expertise in helping agencies grow. I'd love for you to come on my show and talk about your specific expertise in that area. And when you do that, people love to be known. They love to feel important. And so you're kind of playing on the human emotion to get them to say yes. But then you have to follow through. And it can't be a bait and switch where then, you have them on and then you just pitch them your product. If you're having the right people on, and you have the go-giver mindset where you're saying, okay, I'm going to have this person on, but I'm going to detach from the outcome. If they move forward with something with me, awesome. If they don't, I'm excited to help them share their ideas and their expertise. So if you approach it like that, and you're looking to totally serve that person on the other end, when you're done with the show, they're going to know you, they're going to like you, they're going to trust you. And the majority of the time, in my experience, they want to help you. So, if they need what you have, they're going to be way more likely to listen to what you're saying. If they know people who need what you have, they're going to make warm referrals for you. If they could be an advisor for your business, or they can, connect you with somebody for speaking opportunities, they're going to do that because you've given to them first. You've looked to serve that other person. And then the business opportunities end up flowing out of that, as long as you've been intentional about who it is that you're having on your show.
Love it. Well, can you talk a little bit? I mean, you've mentioned LinkedIn Live, Canva as some of the sort of like mechanisms to make this work. Are there any other sort of important mechanisms or things that people need to make sure that they're considering before they launch right into this? Or do you recommend just kind of like, you know, getting some streaming software and jump in the deep end and figure out how to swim?
Yeah, I mean, my answer years ago would be totally different than now. My nature is like, I'm pretty conservative by nature, and I like having things figured out, and I like having them planned out, and that's all wonderful and good. But I've found the more that I just dive into things before I feel ready to do it. And I let the market tell me which direction I should go, and kind of let the market be the guide of how deep I should go in one area or the other. I've actually closed business that way. So back in the day, kind of my origin story ultimately is I was running a small business and I found a problem that I knew that clients had. They were telling me they had this problem, and I created this course. I spent 3 months doing it. I built out a membership website. Like, it was awesome. The content was great. It solved the problem, but nobody bought it from me. And I ended up spending a ton of time and energy on something that nobody ended up, they had the problem, but it wasn't something they were willing to pay for. And through that experience and like multiple other experiences that either I made or watched people I worked for make, the longer you spend prepping and planning for something that you haven't actually validated in the market, the more likely it is that you're going to waste an incredible amount of time and money. And so to me, just do it, man. Like StreamYard, if you're interested in launching a show, well, first of all, shameless plug, I'm launching another Launch Your Show. I'm doing a Launch Your Show in 30 days training coming up here. So if you want to launch a show in 30 days and you're like, I'm just going to do it, then I'll help you do it that way. Or, shoot me a note. I'll send you a video that walks you through how to set it up on StreamYard, LinkedIn, and kind of walks you through the whole process. And you could just launch a show that way. And so, yeah, I recommend using StreamYard, but there's lots of streaming services out there. And it's as easy as you reach out to the guest on LinkedIn. You don't even need Sales Navigator. Just reach out to somebody through a direct message, read somebody's post and you go, wow, that was interesting. Leave a comment. They comment back. You message them and say, I'd love to have you on a show. And then you write a couple questions down ahead of time. You write a simple post, you publish it, and all of a sudden you have a show. And it was that easy. I mean, legitimately, what I just described there the first time is probably going to take you 2 hours to prep. And then once you get used to it, it's like an hour and a half to invite the guest, write the posts, write the question, create the graphic. It's really not that complicated once you've done it a couple times. And then an hour to have them on the show. So yeah, just do it.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the, there's obviously like the recording the day of, that sort of thing. Have you done anything as far as like repurposing, like basically getting more mileage, and extracting as much value from that conversation outside of the conversation itself? Like, are there any, like, I guess, what are the secondary benefits of these sorts of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say this in a couple different ways. The first thing is, what size of company are you and what's your budget? Like, if you're a solopreneur, you have no time and no budget, and you just got to sell. I'll give you an answer. And then, if you have a team and you have a budget, I'll give you another answer. So answer number one is, if you don't have time and you need to make sales right now, don't repurpose your content, because it's going to be way more effective for you to have another interview in that same amount of time it would have taken you to repurpose that than to repurpose it. Like, you're going to get way more value out of having more conversations. So early on, and when you're first starting, I would say lean towards having more conversations more frequently, and don't worry as much about growing an audience, getting extra mileage out of your show, going crazy on promotion. Now, the longer that you do it, or the more budget or the team you have, then you can take the recordings and you can, cut clips out of them. I mean, for clients I was working for in my previous job, we'd be getting 3 to 5 clips, and you could really ultimately, from a 30-minute interview, usually get 8 to 10 clips if you wanted to. Cut those up for social. You can use tools like Munch, or, and David, you probably know the other one. What's the other popular? Opus Clip.
Opus Clip, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of these AI tools that could cut clips for you. You could do it that way. You could use Descript and go through and cut them yourself. That's usually what I do personally. Is if I'm going to cut clips, I use Descript, and you can create some templates pretty easily in there to make them look cool. So and then you can have social content that you're using on YouTube Shorts and TikTok and LinkedIn, and get way more mileage out of it. And where I've actually seen the most benefit come from cutting clips is when I send them to the guests and say, hey, you don't have to post these, but I just want to give these to you, as a bonus for the show if you want to post them. If one of your guests posts that, you're going to get way more traction on the show. And let's say that this is a client account, and I had this happen, and it's like the VP of sales at a client account, and they post about the show, you know who saw that? Every single person in their company. And so, you're wanting to get exposure inside of a company.
Yeah,
When a
that's true.
senior executive posts that content on their personal page, there's no amount of ad dollars that's going to get that level of exposure in the company. So anyway,
Yeah, that
when you're
sounds like
starting
there's
out,
like
don't repurpose. When you're when you get going or you have budget, there's a ton of extra value you can get from all that content you created.
right on. What do you say to people who are like, this sounds like I'm an introvert. This is nerve wracking. You know, how do I know I'm going to be asking the right questions? How do I even know who to, reach out to ask to be on my show? Are there any sorts of pieces of advice that you'd give people who are, I don't know, they're shy, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. So this is my friend John Joyce, and he kind of addressed this himself. So he said, well, he calls me Joe because we know each other for a while. But Joe, I think your concepts and approach to social selling are really unique and powerful. I've adopted your approach in my own efforts, and it's not only effective, but it's fun to know people. And I'm a total introvert, so that's saying a lot. So I mean, even for an introvert, a lot of times having one-on-one conversations is different than like getting up in front of a group and speaking, or going to a networking event. So basically, this process gives an introvert the ability to handpick who they want to talk to, and then not have to go to a networking event to meet them and do all the small talk and all that. And then you have a really specific purpose for having that person on the show. So you're reaching out to them. And you're not saying, "Hey, let's have a general networking call," and then somehow you're trying to, weave your way into a sales conversation. It's really specific. You're saying, "David, you're an expert in this. I'd love to have you on my show." And the show is focused on that, and it really helps keep the guardrails on. And so I found that a lot of introverts actually really love this process because you're having really great one-on-one conversations and kind of skipping all the like chit chat and the things that extroverts tend to like about networking and business development and all that. And then number two, when it comes to who you should have on the show, for the first show or two, I would just say have people on that you're comfortable with having a conversation with that person, whether that's a current client, a colleague, somebody that you can just have a good conversation with. And the reason for that is you're going to be more comfortable. And for your first show, it's better that you feel comfortable with the guest. If you are more of an extrovert, you could have a prospect on, and people have done that, and it works fine too. But then as you go along, it's really important that you figure out who is it that's going to move my business forward. And there's different types of people. There's prospects, people that could become customers of yours. There's potential partners. There's current clients, industry influencers. Like, so yesterday I had somebody on my show. He's probably never going to buy from me. There's a way we could partner. We're talking about it, but there's a more of a chance that we're never going to do business together. But it was my best show I've ever done. I mean, by far, got way more engagement during, after the show. It's getting way more attention, and so just having association with him makes me look more credible and gets me exposure to his audience. So anyway, those are some of the things you want to think about. But what you want to be careful of is not to just have random people on the show. You want to be intentional and say, "Hey, I believe that this person's going to be able to help me drive my business forward and help me grow my business in these specific ways." And as long as you're doing that, ultimately it kind of works out as you have enough people on your show.
That makes a lot of sense.
You asked me a couple of things. I covered all the things you got up there, but
Well, I'm just thinking through different questions I have, and that other people might have. What is there any sort of like, kind of basic advice that you would give to people around, um, you know, developing the right set of questions? I mean, you could probably go on for a long time all about question sets and things like that, but is there more of like a directionally or just like, what sort of mindset do you want to be composing your questions with, if that makes sense?
yeah, before we go there, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself more of an introvert or an extrovert?
Definitely an introvert.
Yeah. So I'd love to ask you that same question back, because you're doing the LinkedIn lives and you've been
Yeah.
running this. So what is it about doing the LinkedIn Live that you feel has been helpful as an introvert versus, maybe some other things you've tried?
I think for me, it's, it- I think if you asked me a year ago, I would say, I'm really uncomfortable, uh, you know, being on camera, being the personality behind something like this. But I think it's, and I'd probably be over planning everything. I think for me, it's, I've become much more of a person in the camp of get going and then get good.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like, that's similar advice that you'd give to other folks who are a little bit reluctant is just, jump in the deep end, figure it out as you go, and you'll get more polished and, have a better approach to this over time. And so I think for me, it was like, I just need to be okay with the awkward, like kind of just push on through the, through the weird and,
Yep.
and yeah, it'll look more polished down the road. And honestly, like you look at YouTubers, from when they first started their channel, some of these gigantic YouTubers, you look at like their first video or their first year's worth of video, and you're just like, how did they get to be this big? Like, this is terrible, like this is really
Yeah.
bad production and it's awkward and weird. It's like, it's because they just kept on doing it.
Yep.
And I think that's been a big thing for me is like, I just got to keep on doing it. I need to exercise this muscle, and it's me. I'm definitely outside of my comfort zone, but the only way to kind of get to a place where I'm comfortable is to um, push through.
I completely agree with you. And I'd say I've had a similar journey. Like I'm probably an omnivert, like I'm right in between. Like I love one-on-one conversations, but I really don't like groups. And that's an area where I've really had to push myself and stretch. But I would say that when I started on camera, I wasn't very comfortable either. But I've done a couple hundred episodes, and people who are really natural at this stuff would probably look at my content and be like, ugh. I don't know about this guy, but I'm a lot better than I was. And so I agree. It's like you just gotta realize that you're gonna screw up sometimes, and most people aren't gonna care. And if they do care, they're probably not the kind of people that are gonna make great clients or be good relationships anyway. And then yeah, once you get going, it becomes easier. And once you've done two or three shows, like I find that once most people have done two or three shows on their own, they're so much more comfortable. And that's where almost everybody that I've had start a show goes, I ended up liking this a lot more than I thought that I would. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. Well, what was it that
Yeah.
caused you? Sorry, I know you're interviewing me. What was it that kind of pushed you over the edge and got you to go, hey, I'm just gonna like do it?
I'm trying to think. I think it was just that it was easy, honestly. It was like I already had the podcast mic, which I know you don't even really need to have a fancy podcast mic. I just had inherited this from a previous job. And I was like, it's not going to be a heavy lift for me to, go get a $20 a month streaming
Yeah.
software. And then just what I did is I used Calendly too. And so I had people booking there. I asked some sort of like preliminary questions in the Calendly link so that I had a little bit of information to go off of when I was for those interviews. Um, so that the interview content is a little bit smarter. And yeah, and then I would just add the link to the live stream closer to the date. And yeah, that's what's worked for me so far. I'm sure I'll polish it and refine it over time, but um, yeah,
How long
it's
do you
been
spend per episode, do you think, like inviting the guest, prepping and doing all that, not including the interview?
mm, I mean, it's probably 2 hours total. That's including the interview.
Yeah.
So an hour of prep and an hour of um, actually recording and or talking afterwards. I feel like that's the other sort of thing that we haven't covered a lot, but I think it's been nice just to have kind of off the record conversations with people afterwards. And yeah, I mean, whether or not it's somebody who is asking about like my services, or sometimes it's like, I'll ask about like hey, are there intros that I can make for you? Based off of what we discussed, it's like, well, maybe there's somebody that I could put them in touch with. So really, I think if it is like, what is it? Back before the internet, you know, uh, a lot of business was done through networking. It was, three
Yeah.
martini lunches was how you closed a deal or something.
Yep.
And now it's like the digital version where, I'm in my basement and I can have a long conversation with someone who's halfway across the states. So
I love it.
yeah,
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I can run if you want me to. I can run through the question set because I do feel like that's something that really stumps people and gets them concerned. But I could kind of give a pretty quick rundown if we have time.
yeah, yeah. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think of question sets. First of all, your question set actually is really important. I do think your question set is what sets apart good interviews from horrible interviews, and like an excellent question set really can make your interviews stand out. It's also what's going to make your guest feel cared for and appreciated. If you ask them the right questions and you help them look really good, they're going to appreciate you for that. Um, and I feel like it is something that takes a while. So there's three things you really want to get from the guests as you develop these questions. So from my perspective, in this, if you're using this as a business development tool, ultimately to network and build relationships with people who are going to move your business forward, the primary point of the question set is to make that other person look good, feel good, so that they like you and trust you by the time the interview's done. And if you accomplish that, you're going to be good. So there's three things that you need to do that. So first is get their unique perspective on a topic. The second one is get stories from the trenches, like how do you get them to apply those things that they know to through stories, and then get them to share practical steps, practical tips or practical steps for um, the listeners. And if you get those three things through your question set, not only is it going to be good content that's going to help you grow an audience over time, but you're also going to build great relationships with your guests. So there's 4 question set types that I recommend people think through, and it really just depends on the type of guests you're having on. So if you have the same type of guest come on, or it's in the same industry, you could have one question set to rule them all. And that's basically you have the same question set, but when you ask that question to each person, they're going to have a slightly different angle on it. So I was running a show interviewing sales leaders, and the first question I'd ask every time is, what's your secret sauce for building relationships with your ideal customers? And pretty much every single person said something different. And that made the follow-up questions make the interview feel completely different for each one, even though the question set was the same. And then I would follow
Mm.
up in between with questions that were unique to what they had said. And so then it kind of makes every interview feel different. So first one is one question set to rule them all. That's a lot easier for you as a host to make, and it also makes the episodes feel more familiar and kind of gives people an idea of what to expect. Second one would be quick question set development. So as you look at their profile, or you look at some of their online content, you just put together a quick question set and you send that over to them. The third one, if you have a little bit more time, is collaborative question set. So that might be you send them a message and say, hey, I know you're an expert in this topic. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to cover? They send you back some notes. Then you could send them a question set based on what they sent you and say, hey, here's the questions I'm thinking, and you send those. And then the final one would be doing a pre-interview. And that's where you're going to schedule 15 to 30 minutes with that person to learn more about them. This is going to produce better content. That's going to help you build a deeper relationship with that person, but it is more time commitment on both ends. So, kind of the pros and cons of that. And yeah, I'll just leave it there because we could go, I can go on a tangent, but that's the high level 4 things 4 question sets that I would recommend, thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And kind of goes back to the, you know, really kind of digging into to them and making sure that they feel like it's centered around them and kind of their unique experiences, and like you're digging for something that is going to allow them to provide value to the audience. So it makes them look good ultimately.
Yeah, and
Well,
one last thing I'll say on that, David, is I feel like a lot of times when people are starting out, they'll ask the question, but feel like a guest interview means that only the guest can talk and you shouldn't talk at all. And I found it to be more effective. Both, I think it's more engaging for the audience, but also it builds more rapport when you're able to ask good follow up questions, or you can kind of pull the context of the conversation into your next question. So even if your question is something basic like, um, you know, what is the biggest challenge that you see agencies facing? I could take something else that you said and pull it in before that question. I'm thinking of this on the fly without having you said something, but it could be something like, man, you talked about how entrepreneurship is a lonely journey, and as you're talking to these agency owners, they're really dealing with loneliness as a huge issue. But what else do you think are some of the big challenges that agencies face? So by doing that, it's kind of, for one, giving your guests the opportunity to think for a second and like have a breather, but then you're also engaging yourself. Or you could tell a personal anecdote yourself and go, you talked about this, I've seen that similar thing in this kind of situation. And you take 30 seconds, 15 to 30 seconds to tell a story that really builds on what they're saying, and then let them respond to it. Or you could even pull that into a follow-up question. And I think it makes the back and forth conversation a lot more interesting.
Yeah. Well, related to that, um, I think there's different types of, in conversations, there's the people who listen to, like, because they're waiting to speak next. They're not really actively listening. And then there's the people who are actually listening to what's being said so that they can kind of digest it and kind of respond. Can you talk a little bit about kind of which approach you need, and maybe kind of how people can be a little more active?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of how to respond to that, because um, I think that really comes down to mindset, and that's something that shouldn't only be the way you do interviews. Like, if you approach business development in the business world with a high level of curiosity, I think you're just going to be way more effective in the long run. Because the more you
Yeah.
go in and you go, I know what I'm talking about. I have great ideas, and they're always going to be right. And I know that my product is great, and this person needs it. If you're approaching it like that, there's all kinds of information that could help you actually close a deal, or help you tweak your product or your offer just slightly to make it more appealing. There's so many things that you're missing out on. So I would say, overall, if you approach business development with curiosity, you're going to win way more often. But then in an interview, it goes a really long way if you genuinely are curious about the other person, and you're taking time to dig in and understand them. And I think that's what the interview style show can really help with. Is most of us want to focus on ourselves. We want to talk about ourselves, our ideas. It's part of why people come on your show, right? But when you purposefully make it all about the guest and them, then it kind of forces you to have that perspective, and they feel that your guests really, they pick up on how interested you are in them during the interview. And the more interested you are in them, and the more they feel that genuinely, the more they're going to be interested in trying to help you win in some way when the interview's done. So, I mean, that's kind of the mindset piece. As far as practically, I highly recommend reading the book "Never Split the Difference" by Chris Voss. It's probably my top business book. I think it's incredibly practical. It's a book about negotiation, but he has some tools in there that I find super helpful during an interview. So I forget what he calls it, but I mean, one of them is mirroring, and that's saying the last three words are the most important three words that the other person said. And that's where you can basically ask them to go further without asking them to go further. And so you could just say something like, they finish their statement going, and that's why small businesses should always start a LinkedIn live show. You're like, oh, wow, small businesses should always start a LinkedIn live show. And you just be quiet, and they'll keep talking, and keep going on and on and on. So it could give you a second to like kind of dig in a little bit more. Or you could say something as simple as like, oh, wow, tell me more about that. Or, wow, it seems like you have a really interesting story behind what you just said. And then, you get them from sharing a tactic to sharing how they came up with that, or what the understanding was that led to that. So yeah, the other piece tactic that he uses is, using the words, it seems like, it sounds like, it looks like, it feels like. And if you use those words, you're not saying you had this feeling, but you're kind of getting them to give a more emotional response. So, man, seems like that was a really frustrating situation. And you just be quiet, and then they're gonna elaborate more on that. And I found that those two tools really help you to go a lot deeper without even having to ever ask a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joseph, this has been super fun. I think the agency audience that I have here. I think this is something that really works well and can dovetail nicely with agency biz dev efforts. Um, can you kind of, if people want to find out more about your formal program that you have around this, where you can kind of walk them through how to do this in a more structured way, what where should they kind of follow up with you and find you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn, definitely. I'm always on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Sellthroughsocial.com is where my website is. Right now, I'm really focusing, and my website's really focused on this 30-day launch a show in 30 days cohort that I'm going to launch, and that's kind of the precursor to a longer group coaching program that's available. But it just helps you get the show going, and then at that point, you can run it on your own. Cool. If you want some extra help, we have further assistance beyond that. So that's $497 starting August 5th. So you could reach out to me about that. And then I do work with clients one-on-one starting at $1,500 a month, and going up from there depending on what you need. And that's really working, one-on-one to really help you dig into who you should be talking to, what kinds of questions you should be asking them, how to build out your lists, what you need to do to launch your show, and kind of walking you through all those pieces on a one-on-one basis. So best way to find out more about that is just to shoot me a DM on LinkedIn, and we could jump on a call and chat about it.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, Joseph, thanks again, and looking forward to staying in touch. Maybe doing
Yeah,
another one of
David,
these down the road.
thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's an honor.
Likewise. Have a good one.
You too.